Century 14 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Tac Tangents with Mike and Jim. One of the things that we didn't really cover when we talked about Boyd was this concept of building a snowmobile. And John Boyd used to do this presentation where he'd take people through this thought experiment where he would ask them to imagine 4 different domains, and that was just the word that he used, was domains. It was a skier on a ski slope, a speedboat, a bicycle, and a toy tank. And under those domains, he would basically make these lists of the things, kind of the elements of those images in your mind. So on a skier, you would have like the chairlifts, skis, people, mountains. The speedboat, you might have sun, the lake, a boat, an outboard motor, water skier. Under a toy tank, you might have, a turret, tank treads, green paint, a toy store, a cannon. Under bicycle, you'd have a chain, a seat, handlebars, a little kid, helmet, whatever. And he would ask people what would happen if we took all of those elements and shattered the domains that kind of organize those in our head and tried to come up with a new reality. And so you basically ended up with this mess of words of different elements of these things, and it was chaos, right? And he would start to highlight kind of one from each image, and it was the handlebars, the outboard motor, the tank treads, and the skis. And he would ask people, what new reality or new domain can we create out of these elements? And obviously the answer, well, maybe it's not obvious, but what seemed obvious to him, at least, he was a genius, is a new snowmobile. That was his new domain. And this was kind of the way that he described how we have a creative nature, or our ability to take things from different domains and relate them to new stuff.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a baseline beginner class of how to creative for guys who don't creative good, right? And it's actually pretty powerful. You pull good ideas, you put them together in a new way, and all of a sudden you have a new good idea. And that's what we're always shooting for here.
And the important part of it is also looking for the bad ideas and ways that we can throw out the bad ones, or the things that we don't like, or the things that don't apply. And one of the things that he talked a lot about was how we can never maintain consistency in ourselves only looking within ourselves. We have to compare ourselves to outside systems. And I think primarily when he was talking about ourselves, he's talking about, the US military in that sense, or any given strategy or tactic or piece of equipment. The idea is we have to constantly be pulling from different areas and comparing and contrasting. And it was kind of this critical thinking analogy and a thought experiment. And it's one that always kind of stood out to me, because I always try to find lessons in things that might seem completely unrelated. And if I was going to nerd out on you, I'd tell you about a book that I read called Predictably Irrational. And it was about
late.
What?
Too late on the nerding out.
It was about a thing called behavioral economics. And it's kind of funny because I nerd out about the human behavior stuff a lot, but it was literally about economics. Like, if I give you 3 choices in a marketing ad, which one are you likely to pick, right? People are predictably irrational. If I put a picture of a puppy, like, there's a reason the Humane Society does the sad little puppy pictures when they want you to give them money, right?
Sarah McLachlan. Oh man, that's a sad.
Yeah.
Oh.
So how do I take those little lessons in that book and apply them to maybe a person in crisis and how I'm going to interact with that person or something, just an example. So one of our stated objectives here in doing this podcast and the Tactical Tangents project as a whole is to elevate the discussion, right? And obviously we're focused on the tactical community. We have backgrounds in that. And we really want to emphasize the importance of critical thinking. So we're going to talk about that in this episode in terms of our struggle to balance where we're coming from. We talk a lot about cop stuff, and I know that. Obviously, when I talk about elevating the discussion in the tactical community, one of the things that I want to do is help cops get smarter. But my intent has never been for this to be a cop podcast or a cop-centric podcast even. We want it to be cop relevant, but we also want it to be relevant to everybody else, right? And that's my perspective as the resident cop. Jim's got his perspective, right? He wants it to be relevant to concealed carry, and he wants it to be relative to the military, but he also wants to help cops. And so that's kind of our secret sauce, right? Is we're trying to take all those individual elements and pull the things that are good and compare to the things that are bad and use them as a way to apply critical thinking to elevate the discussion and to make everyone better collectively. And at the same time, maybe we can even make it kind of entertaining, hopefully.
And I specifically want to learn about cop stuff because it's outside of my realm, right? I've got the military background. I've got the civilian concealed carry background. And so I'm particularly interested in pulling every lesson I can from my cop buddies like Mike. And there's a reason, in addition to that, we keep bringing up these cop examples. And not just because I've watched every season of Cops, because I'm a nerd.
I can't tell you how many times Jim calls me and he's like, so I was watching Cops.
So I was watching Cops, and but there's more to it than that. And there's something like 1 million cops in this country. They often now have dash cameras and body cameras, and they're making like 1 million contacts a day out in the population. So that's a lot of available data, and we would be stupid not to mine it. The other factor here is that cops form a common reference point. Anybody in America can picture what a traffic stop in America looks like and sounds like and what right kind of looks like. And so everyone's got kind of a common frame of reference for this. And again, this is a key point. Not all of it applies across the board. The magic is in figuring out what parts to apply and which ones to toss.
So, like we're saying, we're not trying to make this all about that, all about the cop stuff. We think there's value there. Obviously, for the cops listening, hopefully it's helpful to them. But the goal here is critical thinking. And so that's why today we're going to get into a couple of police shootings and take some lessons out of that. But we want people to think about the way that we find that balance. We're not trying to be too narrowly focused, but we're also not trying to just have a podcast where we just talk about our day and the weather and sports. One of the main things that we want to accomplish with this is to challenge people in the way that they think about some of these topics and tactics in general, self-defense, survival in general. And like Jim said, we have a lot of data that come from law enforcement. I have a lot of data because I do it every day, but it's a good analogy. It's a good balance, I think, between civilian everyday stuff and like outright war. It's somewhere in the middle. So this is tricky because suppose that I want to take a police officer or a group of police officers and provide some method of learning or some source of education for them.
Well, the first thing you should do is tell them all the things they're doing wrong.
Yeah. Obviously.
Yeah.
That's going to go
They'll
really
like that.
That's going to go
That
really
goes
well,
well.
right? Well, so on one hand, they want someone who's going to understand their side of it and who supports them. And I would like to think I'm that guy. But how do I take...
And me.
Huh?
So am I, obviously.
Yep.
Big fan of cops.
But how do I take that same group and also challenge them in sometimes a negative way? Like, how do I call them out for doing something stupid? How do I point out that someone sucks and also support them and have their back? Sometimes that's an impossible thing to accomplish because there's no way I'm going to make everyone happy and people are going to disagree with us. And to be clear, our goal isn't to make everyone happy. Our goal isn't to have a podcast where, at the end of every episode, people go, man, that went really well. We're trying to challenge people on purpose, right? And I'm going to call out people for what I want, and I'm going to defend people for what I feel deserves to be defended.
And there are cases and topics out there that evoke a lot of emotion. So the challenge that Mike and I face is to find a way that isn't necessarily appeasing either side. We're not trying to compromise ourselves, but we think it's important to give fair credit to both sides. So in today's critical thinking experiment, we're going to discuss two very similar police shootings and try to offer some perspectives.
Yeah, and that's the key, is the perspective. And especially in a lot of these controversial police shootings, they evoke a lot of emotion, and people tend to feel one way or the other about it, right? The minute...
Hang 'em high.
Yeah. The minute I offer a point in favor of the cops or try to explain perspective of the cops, I immediately sound like I'm defending them, right? Even if they did something wrong. Well, isn't it possible that maybe there's some factors in there that people who haven't done the job haven't been able to consider or are unaware of, or they haven't experienced it? Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to do, is make sure that those people listening to the podcast have that perspective. As it happens, I think most cops suck at explaining that. Speaking of calling people out for stuff, our communication skills could be better at explaining why we did what we did.
Man, why do you hate cops?
Exactly. And the other thing is, quite frankly, I don't think a lot of cops have done the work to really find any academic support for some of the things that they otherwise know really well. And for example, what I'm talking about is, if I talk about a police shooting and an officer feels that it was an appropriate decision and it seems obvious to them, they're speaking from a background of making use of force decisions and going through a bunch of training. That background to them is what makes it make sense. Someone coming from another background doesn't have any of that. What cops have is the ability to make those decisions, right? The training, but they don't necessarily have the ability to teach that to other people. And in this case, we're talking about the public or the people who disagree with you or whatever. So they implicitly understand some of those things. And let's just say, for example, they understand the way that stress manifests itself in the body and in the brain, right? Just kind of intuitively. And the way that it affects our ability to make decisions, usually negatively, but sometimes positively. But maybe they haven't really read up on it, and their explanations are kind of off, or maybe they're not really well grounded in a well sounding, articulate way of explaining that in an academic sense, right? In other words, they sound like they're reaching, and they're not BSing you because they implicitly get it, but they just don't have that fundamental understanding of it to really convey that, right?
And it might make sense inside their social circle.
Yeah.
But the second they try to explain it to somebody outside their social circle, it gets real tricky, right?
Exactly. And then on the other hand, the minute I start talking crap, right? The minute I start criticizing the cops, or I say something that they're not comfortable with, they're immediately going to stop listening. They're going to think, oh, I'm one of those, right? I'm one of these, hippie activist people that thinks that, that I'm trying to change the world or something with how we do police work, and we've been doing it for years, and we've got it all figured out, right? And they stop listening.
And that's even worse when I do it. Despite having had to make my own shoot or no shoot decisions in combat, when I, as a non-cop, criticize cops, I'm Monday morning quarterbacking.
Yeah, that's the label we throw at it. And yeah, that's what we're doing, but guess what? That's what everyone's doing. That's what your bosses are doing. That's what the public is doing. That's what the judge and the jury are going to do. And
that's what we all need to do to get good lessons out of this. You have to sit there and have that discussion and figure out what we can do better next time.
So if you think that we're just jumping to the defense of cops just to defend them, you have to understand that if you want us to get through to cops, we have to be on their side to some degree, right? We have to see their perspective. And I have to try to pair that criticism with useful ways of doing better. And if you're a cop who thinks that we're just a bunch of haters, well, suck it up, Buttercup. I don't know what better support I can offer you than trying to give you an alternative way of looking at it, right? Cops screw it up all the time. And if you're a cop and you think that you don't, you're full of crap. So I've done it. You've done it. We've all done it. We have to acknowledge our faults and try to get better. Otherwise, we lose credibility with the public. And it's important that we see both sides to this to try to get that mutual understanding that's actually mutual and not just the benefit of the doubt. Because as we're seeing, in a lot of cases, it's not just a perceived mistrust. In a lot of cases, it's actually true. We're actually giving them good reasons to not trust us, right? We're giving the public good reasons to not trust the police in a lot of cases.
Feeding into a narrative. Yep.
Yeah. So more often, we know that it probably sounds like we're defending the cops. And I want to make sure that I'm setting the record straight here. I wouldn't be here trying, among other things, to build an audience of cops and trying to help them get better and smarter if I didn't see that room for improvement. Okay, I wouldn't be doing this project to begin with.
And for example, back in 2015, an Albuquerque police lieutenant shot his own undercover because he didn't show up to the briefing. You can love cops and want them to come home safe and still make some valid debrief points off of that.
Yeah, what commander doesn't go to a briefing and then show up on his own tactical operation behind a gun is beyond me. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you.
So I'm going to go ahead and Monday morning quarterback that.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and say that was bad.
Yeah, that he's retarded.
Series of decisions.
That's what I'm going to go with.
Yep.
So, again, most cops I know are good people. They want to do the right thing, and a lot of the ones I know for sure that are listening are absolutely trying to go out of their way to get better, and I applaud that. I just want to make sure that if anyone is just coming into this for the first time and they're hearing what we have to say, understand that we're going to do that, okay? We're going to challenge a lot of those assumptions and way of thinking and go through this stuff, okay? And like I said, a lot of cops are good people. They want to do the right thing, but a lot of them also lack the training. We're not saying that's their fault. They're a lot of times under-resourced and understaffed and undertrained because of those factors. Has nothing to do with their good or bad intent and everything to do with their bosses and their leadership and their local government, right? But we have to try to be part of the change to fix that. And I think this podcast is a perfect medium to do it because there are only so many hours in the day. So if I could give some kind of secondary activity for cops to listen to and get better, then that's one opportunity. So for everyone else listening, as we start going through these shootings, I want you to understand the bottom line up front here is I think Jim agrees with me, he can give his spin on it, but I think both of these shootings that we're going to talk about were bad shootings. But we have to understand, and we really have to see this in terms of there's a difference between a bad shooting and murder. And that's one of the problems that we're going to talk about. But no matter what we call it, whether it's a bad shooting or whether it's murder, we don't prevent the next one unless we help officers get better and understand those factors and try to find a way to mitigate them.
Absolutely. We as a society, and when it comes to these decisions of life and death and these decisions of shoot or don't shoot, we tend to see things as binary. It's a good shoot or it's a bad shoot. And if it's a good shoot, everything is hunky-dory and the guy should go back to work and great. And if it's a bad shoot, we should hang him from the nearest tree. And sometimes the shoots are like that. Sometimes the shoot is so bad that, yeah, the guy probably does need to go to jail over it. But the world is gray, and human perception and human error is not the same as malice or criminal negligence. So just because a shoot was bad, quote-unquote bad, doesn't mean we should hang that guy. And just because the shoot was technically defensible and not prosecuted doesn't mean the cop should even keep his job. We need to be able to honestly debrief these shoots and find a useful outcome. And if we start throwing cops in prison for making human errors, you're going to find very few sane and smart cops who want to make that risk of going to prison every time they show up to work for, what is it, like $20 an hour, Mike?
I make $24.94 an hour. Yeah.
Yeah, so if I'm going to take on that much liability, I want to add another zero on that per hour.
Good luck.
And you can see that's laughable. It is laughable to expect somebody to work at mall cop wages and expect super Delta SEAL performance out of them. You're just not going to get it.
And the reality is, none of us, not many of us that I know of, are in it for the money. But like Jim's talking about, if I know that unless it is a super clean, obvious, I'm just not going to take the risk. Yep. What happens if I lose my job and I go to prison? I leave my wife and kids behind, and you know what I mean? It's just not worth that risk. It's not worth enforcing laws. And so everyone gets to live in chaos, right? And some people claim that they like that. I think those people are probably more privileged than they realize if they think that like, oh, I'm totally cool with that. Well, you probably haven't lived in an area where you've had to be victimized all the time, because thieves will be thieves and dopers will be or whatever, right? So anyway, so we're going to get into these two shootings, and along the way, we're going to offer some perspectives for cops, and I just want you to keep in the back of your mind that we're trying to offer some perspective. We're not defending the shootings. And I want the cops to think about both ends of those perspectives. And I want the non-cops to also understand both ends of that perspectives. But don't think that I'm just defending the shootings. I think they were bad shootings overall. And I also think that there's some objectivity to the self-defense justification that comes into these decisions. And that's kind of what we're talking about, is the difference between murder and human error, or an inaccurate, perception, or an inaccurate subjective assessment, which we're going to get into in a little bit. You just can't call these the same thing as like the drunken husband who stabs his wife to death. They're just different. It's not fair to say he's either a cold-blooded killer or he's totally good. There could have been things in the middle, and frankly, it might not even be fair to the cold-blooded killers. I'm not sure all the cops that I know have the balls to run around and start whacking people.
And on that note, there's a reason we're investing this much time talking about this, because we're going to talk about shootings all the time. And some of those shootings are going to be good or bad or questionable. And I don't want to have this discussion every single time we talk about a shooting. So that's why we're doing it up front here, because you're going to get more podcasts about this topic.
Think about Boyd's snowmobile thought experiment. That's what these are, is they're critical thinking lessons. And it's supposed to be food for thought. And that's it. And you can form your own opinions. I've got mine. Jim's got his. Frankly, in both of these shootings, as I went through them, I had mixed feelings about them the whole time. And, I don't know what the outcome should have or would have been if I were there, but it's okay to have mixed feelings. It's okay to not come out of it with it's either good or bad. It could just be unfortunate and sad. And
I came here to laugh, not to feel.
Yeah, right. So try to wrap your head around that. And like I said, we're going to talk about it in terms of teaching new officers listening that there are ways, hopefully, to prevent the next bad one. And we want to offer those perspectives on the complexities of it, because I know that cops aren't good at communicating some of that stuff. And maybe we can hopefully model that so that they can explain it better in the future. So the two we're going to talk about, the first one, and I'm not going to go through every minute little detail of this. We're just going to kind of scratch the surface and give you.
You can literally just Google them. There's a ton of articles and YouTube videos and stuff.
Philando, Castile is the first one. That one is out of Minnesota, I think. And I actually wrote an article on this one on our website and on Facebook. And the second one is the Dave Shaver shooting, which a verdict just came out recently on. That was out of Mesa, Arizona. So we're going to do Castile first. The background on this is an officer was doing a traffic stop for a taillight out. It was an equipment violation, minor traffic offense. Walks up to the driver's door of the car, and during the contact with the driver, the guy says, "Hey, sir, just so you know, I just have to let you know I have a gun on me." And the cop's like, "Okay, well, don't reach for it. Don't reach for it. Don't reach for it. Don't reach for it." Bang, 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 bang. And he shoots the guy, right? And I want you to listen to the audio here from the dash camera. Now, this is important. We don't have body-worn camera of this footage. We only have dash cam footage with audio. The driver's girlfriend was in the car sitting next to him and says that the guy was reaching for his wallet. The officer perceived, apparently, that he was reaching for the gun that he just declared to the officer. So listen to the audio, and then we'll talk a little bit about it.
Well, sir. Good. How are you? Good. Reason I put you over, your brake lights are out. So you only have one active brake light, and that's going to be your passenger side one. Your third brake light, which is up here on top, and then this one back here, is going to be out. You have your license and insurance?
I do have a firearm on me.
Don't reach for it then. Don't pull it out.
I'm not pulling it out.
Don't pull it out.
You just killed my boy. That wasn't me. He wasn't me.
Don't pull it out.
He wasn't.
Don't move. Fuck.
Oh, man. I can't
Fuck.
believe this. Oh, my
Fuck.
God. Oh, my
Don't
God.
move.
Oh, my
Don't
God.
move.
Oh, my God. I'm shaking.
Don't move.
Don't move, baby.
Code 3. Get the baby girl out of here.
Don't
Oh,
move,
fuck.
sir.
Don't move.
Don't move, babe, please.
Fuck.
Did I mention the language warning? My bad. Language warning. Heads up. So now I've done a lot of traffic stops, and I've had a lot of people do weird things. Now, there's probably a lot of concealed carriers out there listening, and I know Jim's one of them, who has a very well thought out, like well under control plan for how his declaration of a firearm on a traffic stop is going to go, right? It's like, I'm keeping my hands...
There's an article about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I'm keeping my hands exactly right here. I'm going to be honest with the officer, tell him exactly, ask what he wants me to do, right? And it's very under control. I can tell you that is not everybody.
It's human nature. It's human nature to want to show people what you have and to point to it.
Yeah.
And the motion of pointing to it looks like you're drawing.
Right. And so what I've seen a lot of people do is I go, hey, do you have any weapons in the car? And they go, yeah, I got a gun right here. And they reach for it. And I go, no, don't do that. But for whatever reason, they do stupid stuff like that. Like you think it would be common sense to not reach for the gun if I just asked you if you had a gun, but people do it. So the other thing is people have kind of these mental scripts that are already programmed into their head, into their subconscious. And this is one of the big things that we have to understand about human decision making is the difference between our conscious and our subconscious. But how many times, a day or a week or in your life have you reached for your wallet and pulled out your ID or your driver's license or credit card, whatever? And so this guy, in the course of letting the officer know and being honest, saying, hey, I got my I got a gun on me, just so you know, he's also processing kind of subconsciously that he's getting his driver's license out for the officer. And once that plan is kind of set in motion, it's hard to get in the middle of it, right? And so, again, this one's tough because the only two sides of the story that we have since Philando Castile was killed is the officer, who clearly is under the impression that this guy was reaching for a gun by the fact that he shot the guy, and two, the girlfriend, who perceived that he was just reaching for his wallet. We can't make a determination ourselves. There's no footage. So that's kind of a point in favor of the body-worn camera, obviously, although, who knows what that would have actually been able to see. But we're never going to know. We're not going to know what he was doing with his hands. I don't think the officer would have repeated several times, don't reach for it, don't reach for it, don't reach for it, if he wasn't doing something with his hands, right?
So this is probably going to end up being a stupid story, but I got to share it because it was so blatant of an example of it's hard to stop emotion once it starts, right? So last night,
in law enforcement, we call it operational momentum.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yeah.
So last night, we were operationally momentuming the kids to bed. and I've gotten in the habit of, once we bathe the kids, we hang the towels up and reuse them like you do. And my wife grabbed a towel off a kid and was about to toss it into the hamper. I was like, no, don't do that. I'm going to hang it up because I don't want to have to do laundry and I'm lazy. And she actually couldn't stop herself from doing it. It was already off and into the hamper. And she's like, well, if you wanted me to hang on to it, you should have told me. But
I did tell you.
and that's not a knock on her. That was just that's that same thing. It's human. She'd already made her decision about what she was going to do, and she was already doing it, and she didn't even really process the words that I was saying.
Yeah, the other day I was in the Best Buy parking lot, and I was driving on like the main thoroughfare of, one of the aisles in the parking lot. And it was a main thoroughfare, so I have the right of way. There's someone that's pulling out of their little aisle, and they're gonna just cut across in front of me. And she starts to pull out in front of me, and I can see that she's looking the opposite direction. She's not even looking towards me. And so I beat my horn at her, and she looks at me and stops, and so I start to continue by, like, pardon me, and she, like, after looking at me and stopping, like, goes. She already had it made up in her mind that she was driving through that little intersection. And once that was in play, she couldn't update her decision making in time to, like, interrupt that.
So just on this, what is the lesson here as far as what you as a cop do on a traffic stop to keep someone from doing that in the first place?
People are going to do it. From experience, I know that no matter what, some people are going to do stuff like that, and so I anticipate it, right? First of all, when I ask that question, I just assume that the answer is going to be yes. And so usually I preface it with, hey, without reaching for it, are there any guns in the car? And people still reach for it. So
I'm going to ask you a question, and I would like you to keep your hands on the wheel while I ask you this question.
And frankly, that's not necessarily on every traffic stop. It just kind of depends. It depends on things like how much visibility do I have of that particular car or that particular person and their clothing, and so it just depends. But you can usually tell a concealed carrier a lot of times, like if it's someone who has, gotten a card or a license, and like I walk up on the car and I see their hands, like hands are together at 12 o'clock on the wheel, and I go, oh, you have a gun in the car, don't you? Yep. Okay. Yeah, I figured. I think that the takeaway is just to anticipate it and to know that's going to happen. And this is tricky because I cannot sit a bunch of police officer recruits in a class. When I talk about cops being undertrained, it's not, again, we just don't have the hours for it, but there's no way that I'm going to help them memorize every behavioral quirk that people are going to do. And so I anticipate it. I anticipate that they're going to motion for it, and that doesn't mean that they're going to kill me. It just means that it's human nature for them to reach for it. And so I make sure that I'm prepared for it, and that I'm prepared to react to it, usually by getting out of the way, right? If you're in a seated position in a car, it's pretty hard to shoot over your shoulder. So you can move out of that position if you think that the guy's going to shoot you, probably more efficiently than shooting back. And two, I'm ready to follow up those, that question as they start reaching for it with, stop what you're doing, listen to me, don't reach for it. So those are probably the big ones. I mean, again, it's hard to prevent. And it's, as we're going to talk about here, we're going to get into the Mesa shooting, and it's another one of those behavioral quirks,
Very, very similar. Yep.
So Dave Shaver, this incident, Mesa, Arizona, officers went to a man with a gun call at a hotel, and somehow, and this is one of the difficult things about going through these shootings, is sometimes we're missing a lot of the context. We don't have all the details. But they get directed to a hotel room where there's a male and female who they're contacting, who come out of the room into the hallway where these officers are addressing them. And so they start giving commands to the female, who I guess is the guy's wife. She gets detained, and the male is, pretty, we'll say he's
disoriented.
I guess, yeah. I mean, really, he's scared. That's probably the best word for it, is scared. He's worked up, and so they start giving him commands, and like as a gesture to surrender, he puts his hands behind his back. Well, the problem with doing that, obviously, when he was told not to do that is that it's towards his waistband and some people keep a gun back there. And the officers had information supposedly that this guy was armed. And so they respond to that by yelling at him to get his hands up and telling him not to do that again. And at one point, they're very, very clear and very, very precise about how big of a deal that was. But they also are doing it in a tone and a manner that is, they're basically, and I'm going to play the audio. You can judge for yourself, but they're screaming at the
Hostile.
guy. Yeah.
Hostile.
They're screaming at the dude, and that's working him up more. And so, how well is he hearing me at that point? I don't know. So they tell him not to put his hand, keep his hands up no matter what, or they're going to shoot him. And then they tell him to start crawling towards them. And so he has his hands out in front of him, and he's crawling. And at some point, we're guessing, we don't know for sure, but perhaps his pants are falling down. And so he reaches back with one hand to pull up his pants. Well, they just told him, don't put your hands down to your waistband again, we're going to shoot you. And he does it, so they shoot him. He didn't have a gun. Presumably, he was just pulling up his pants. When you listen to the recording, it doesn't sound like the guy has any ill intent. I mean, who knows? It's hard to tell. But check.
You can say whatever you want. It's what you do with your hands, right?
Yeah, exactly. So check out the audio on this one.
Okay, young man, listen to my instructions and do not make a mistake. You are to keep your legs crossed. Do you understand me?
Yes, sir.
You are to put both of your hands palms down, straight out in front of you. Push yourself up to a kneeling position. I said, keep your legs crossed!
Sorry.
I didn't say this in conversation. Put your hand there! Hands up in the air! You do that again, we're shooting you. Do you understand?
Please do not shoot me.
Then listen to my instructions.
I'm trying to do what you
Don't talk! Listen! Hands straight up in the air. Do not put your hands down for any reason. You think you're going to fall, you better fall on your face. Your hands go back in the small of your back or down. We are going to shoot you. Do you understand me?
Yes, sir.
Crawl towards me. Crawl towards me!
Yes, sir.
Don't go!
So you can hear that guy. Obviously, the kid's scared. Like I said, I got no better word for it. I'm not trying to make a claim on the dude's pride. But he sounds scared. He sounds pretty worked up. Whatever you want to call it. And then the officers respond. I guess angrily is the best word that I can describe for it. So we have to talk about these kind of behavioral things that people do because, again, that action of reaching down and pulling up your pants if it's falling down. The analogy, I was in a conversation with someone, and the analogy that I used was like when women, adjust the strap on their bra, right? Or pull their hair out of their face, or and guys do similar things. We'll spare you the details, but you get what I'm saying. Is like people just have these little physical
ticks and quirks,
adjustments, and things that just happen subconsciously. We don't put any thought to that because we've done it so many times. The analogy I used in the last episode, I talked about when I work at night and I turn my headlights on when I leave the station, even if it's during the day, or I pull my flashlight out, right? Those are things that we've just programmed into ourselves. And so those are difficult things to counter because do I think the guy should have died over that? No. Could you argue that the guy reached for his waist after being told not to do that and how big of a deal it was? Yeah. Well, let's get into that. Okay. So what are some of the factors at play? The biggest one that I think most people in the public don't understand that well is reaction time. Action is faster than reaction, right? And this concept is kind of fundamental to the way police officers are trained, and that is kind of the driving force behind, I would probably say, all police use of force decisions, if not a majority of them.
Yeah. A fundamental point of the OODA loop thing that we keep mentioning is time. If you have time, if you have distance, if you have shielding, you've got options. If you have backup providing lethal cover, that can buy you some time, some reaction space. Time is freedom. And when you don't have it, you don't have any freedom. Your hands become a lot more tied.
And what you have to understand, too, is that time and this reaction time thing it goes both ways. So there's a video, it's a TED Talk by a guy named Brian Willis. And I think it's called The 2 Most Dangerous Words in Law Enforcement, or The Most Dangerous Weapon in Law Enforcement, one of the two. And the guy is very well spoken. He talks about how it takes time to start and it takes time to stop. So even if you perceive that the threat is over, it still takes you time to take your foot off the gas and hit the brake, right? So the same is true if I tell a guy, hey, get your hand up, right? It's going to take him a minute to do that. And it's in those critical seconds that it gets weird. What we're seeing more and more is people going through, we have members of the media who are going through these use of force simulators. And what they're learning is if I wait for the guy to point the gun at me, it's too late. That action versus reaction time, he can have plenty of rounds out of that gun coming my way before I can react fast enough to do anything about it if I wait until the gun is pointed at me. So, for example, if a gun is pointed at my head, is that guy a lethal threat? Well, the answer is, yeah, probably. If the guy has a gun down at his side, well, he wasn't pointing at anybody. Well, here's the problem. If I wait for him to point it, it's too late, right? So that time thing is a big, big component of all of these decisions that you have to think about. The next big factor is the difference between an objective and a subjective analysis of the incident. Objective versus subjective, and I can't speak. So, Jim, can you tell me the difference?
Words are hard. Communicating is hard for cops. We know that. and I would love to give you some beautiful textbook definition of subjective and objective, and I could go read to you out of Webster's dictionary, but that would get boring for everybody. The point here is that to view it objectively, you have to remove preconceived notions, biases, feelings, and a lot of the context, frankly, out of the situation. In the legal world, they use the phrase reasonable, and always highlight that reasonable minds can differ. Just because I would shoot and Mike wouldn't, or vice versa, doesn't mean I'm always right or he's always wrong, or vice versa. So part of this is putting yourself in the perspective of each party, and a big key to this is that I try not to read into the intent of any of the players. I try not to see one as the good guy or the bad guy, or assume that one is racist or one isn't. I try to overlook the derogatory information, like the fact that one guy, say, had some stupid crap written on the side of his gun. Oops. I also try to consider what either party couldn't know. Like if an officer is responding to a guy with a gun and there ends up not being a gun, I don't hold that against them. The fact that this guy in Mesa didn't end up having a gun, the cops couldn't know that at that time.
And that's part that, like I said, that's part of the problem is that if I wait till I see that gun and it's coming at me, it's too late. I'm already behind the curve, right? That's that time component. So the way I would describe the difference between being objective and subjective is that being objective means that I'm considering things that I can measure or I can see in some way, right? Specific facts or circumstances. While subjective means that I have to attach some kind of interpretation or a connotation to it. And it's tricky because we can be factually objective in a use of force decision, but we can't always make accurate assumptions about what their intent is, right? And so we have to look, it's important to look through that lens when we're judging a use of force. This objective analysis is key because I can't put my finger on all of those thoughts and feelings and all the little things that you can't really see or measure in the middle of it. For one thing, I don't know what the guy is really going to do. And on the other side of the spectrum, there's no way that you are going to feel exactly like I did in that moment necessarily, right? So neither one of us can read each other perfectly. So we have to go with kind of the specific facts. So before we go off the deep end here on this subjective and objective thing, understand that, and most cops will know this, so this is kind of for the non-law enforcement crowd, but cops pay attention because you need to understand how to explain this to people. the Supreme Court, and therefore every other court, look at use of force cases using the standard they call objectively reasonable. Now, all the cops in the room are now saying to themselves, yeah, so why are we talking about being subjective? Well, not so fast, because yes, we want to be objective in our analysis, but there's that layer of reasonable, right? Objectively reasonable. So for the non-law enforcement crowd, you'll notice that doesn't say fair. I don't have to be in a fair fight. There's no rule that says I can't up the ante, right?
Or even nice.
Yeah, or nice. It says I have to be reasonable, right? So what's the difference? Well, that's part of the secret sauce, because if I say that I'm looking at it objectively, but then I also have to be reasonable, well, there's a layer of subjectivity to that, right? Because what I think is reasonable and what Jim thinks is reasonable and what you think is reasonable might be different things. What the courts have described as reasonable, or what the reasonable officer standard is, what they say, is what would a reasonable officer have done in a similar situation with a similar background, similar training, similar experience, without the 2020 vision of hindsight. So they've also said that calculus must embody an allowance for the fact, and this is basic, I'm going off of memory, but it's word for word out of the court case Graham versus Connor. Every police officer should have that case memorized. So if you don't, get your read on.
We'll link to it in the show notes.
The calculus must embody an allowance for the fact that police officers are required to make use of force decisions in situations that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving, and that not every seemingly unnecessary push or shove might be unreasonable when judged from the peace of the court's chambers, something like that. So when people jump to the defense of cops like in situations like this, they have to be careful, because that objectivity argument, as you can see, there's still some room for interpretation, right? And I've seen, on both of these cases, I've seen cops divided on it. In fact, when I wrote the article on Philando Castile, we had a little debate going in the comments between a bunch of cops. So if the standard is what would a reasonable officer do in similar circumstances, well, if they're not the same, then you're screwed. And if they are the same, then you're okay. And guess what? It's not the cops that are going to get to decide. It's the judge and the jury or whatever, right? So like I said earlier, at various times looking at both of these incidents, I've had mixed feelings myself. And the more important part about this is, how many times do we go back and we watch the video more than once? I know I did. Jim, did you watch the videos more than once?
Yes.
Especially those critical moments where you're like, oh, he reached for his hand, he reached behind his back. Like, let's go watch that again. Mm-hmm. Well, the cops didn't get to do that. And we have to factor that in when we're making this analysis, right? And even a jury is going to do that. They're going to get the body-worn camera footage, and they're going to go over it probably a dozen times when they're making this decision, right? Over and over and over. The cops don't get that chance in the moment. So we have to layer that. That is part of the objectivity that we have to look at. And we have to layer that subjective analysis or interpretation, because in this particular case, in both of these cases, it would seem to me that neither one of these guys should have been killed. I don't think that either one of these shootings was a good shooting. But again, objectively, it's real easy to look at it and say, okay, Mesa, Arizona, the guy put his hands behind his back. He was told to put his hands up, and if he can't, if he's going to fall on his face, because if he moves his hands, we're going to kill you. He was told that specifically, and he still did it again. Well, I can't make the entire case on the use of force. Step 1, he was armed. Step 2, he reached for his waist and was warned. And step 3, he did it again. So obviously it's cool. The guy still got killed over it, and he still wasn't armed, which means he wasn't reaching for a gun. He could have been feigning it and doing the suicide by cop thing. I don't know. But regardless, there's that layer of subjectivity that we have to look at, where we say, I don't know, man. I think that guy was just scared. He was probably just pulling up his pants. I don't think he needed to die. That's important.
One of my points is, when I see cops cite Graham v. Connor, they're citing it kind of blindly. They'll say, yep, that's Graham v. Connor, and that's why I can shoot people. And that doesn't work for me for a lot of reasons. But it's one of the reasons I keep coming back to how much you get paid. Because if I pay you like I pay a lawyer, and I expect you to show up to work like you've got a lawyer background, then I'm in a much better position to hold you liable, right? And when I think about those jobs where you get paid $400 an hour or $800 an hour, that's the difference, is those guys are civilly liable for their decisions. A surgeon or a doctor, or I'm sorry, same thing, surgeons, docs, lawyers. Well, one is part of the other, yeah. And they carry insurance for that reason. And the world has figured out how to handle human errors among doctors and lawyers. And the world has not figured out how to handle human errors among cops, even though the outcomes are often the same. A brain surgeon who is negligent kills you just as dead as a cop who is negligent.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference is the brain surgeon's making $1,200 an hour or $12,000 an hour, and you're making $24.95. That's the difference. And so how do we reconcile that?
Yeah, that's the problem. Is like our department already consumes the majority of, public safety already consumes the majority of our municipal budget.
Yeah,
and it's already every year. It's, we're trying to make ends meet, and so we have to fight over a 5 or 10% raise. The bus drivers get it every year. You want to know why? Because they can strike.
Yep.
We can't strike. The bus drivers, every year, they want it, and they don't get it. They go on strike. They get it. We can't strike. And we wouldn't, really. Like,
yeah, and there are things you can do. I'm not a labor relations expert by any stretch, but I do know that some police unions are better at public advocacy than others. And I'm not saying necessarily that we should pay you guys a lot more than we are, but I think we should have some expectation management about how liable you can hold someone you're only paying that much to. And going back to kind of our original points, just because we don't like the shoot doesn't mean we think those guys should all go to prison for the rest of their lives, right? And I think there are good things we can take from that, like, were those good commands? Now, there are things Mike likes about those commands, but in general, most people watching it are like, this is like an awful game of Simon Says. And listening to it with zero stress and zero guns in my face and no one screaming at me, I'm not sure I could do all the things they were asking. Cross your legs and crawl. I don't know how to please you. And if I make a mistake, you're going to kill me. Oh, and by the way, they did. If I put a gun at your head and I say, start your car or brush your teeth, and if you make a mistake, I'm going to kill you, you're probably going to mess up. Just that stress is going to mess you up, right? And you can reasonably and objectively add in some context here. Would it matter to you if the cop had a swastika tattooed on his forearm? Would it matter to the jury? What about if he had something stupid engraved on the side of his weapon?
Yep. So, again, like Jim said, we have to go over and look through this through the lens of, I don't think it was criminal murder. I also don't think the guy needed to die. And so it's something in between. Was it a good shooting? Probably not. Was it murder?
Probably not.
Also probably not. So we're kind of stuck in the middle there, right? And that's okay. It's okay that we're somewhere in the middle.
It's defensible, but it's a shit show.
Yeah. And so we got to try to counter that for next time. So back to our main kind of considerations there. We've got the time element, action versus reaction. We've got the difference between subjective and objective analysis. And to be clear, what we're saying is, yes, we have to judge these things through an objective lens. And that objective lens has to be specifically look at those facts, specifically look at things like they couldn't go back and watch the video twice and, all of that stuff. But then also layer that with a little bit of subjectivity and understand kind of the total picture, because that total picture and that context is important. What they knew and what they couldn't have known, those things are key. The next thing, and Jim kind of got into this a little bit, was, and it's kind of related to the commands, but it has to deal with stress, right?
Well, in that Castile shooting, the officer sounded pretty assed up. He was stressed, right? there's something to be said about keeping your cool. In the cockpit, we have a rule called no fast hands. You don't want to have an engine fire and then accidentally shut down the other working engine. Then you become a glider, and that's not cool. And I'll link to a particularly nauseating video of a C5 doing basically exactly that. They pulled back the wrong throttle. And, can I judge them as a fellow pilot? Absolutely, I judge them. Could I tell you I couldn't have made the same mistake? No, I've absolutely made that mistake in the sim. That's why we have a sim.
But that's what the lesson learned is. The lesson learned is we go back and we watch it. We say, hey, those guys screwed that up, like in a big way. How do I make sure that I prevent that? Well, it's important that I remember when I'm going through this checklist of an in-flight emergency that I slow it down enough to make sure that I'm attacking the right problem, right?
Yep.
So managing stress is kind of the next big one. And I remember we actually did some use of force training recently at our department. And it was kind of a decision-making centric thing. Everyone in the whole department had to go through it. And there was a pretty high-level commander that came through one of the scenarios that I was running. And he also got a little assed up, as we say. And when we debriefed him and we were asking him what happened, he goes, I just couldn't get the words out of my mouth. And we're like, maybe you should keep that in mind the next time you look through a use of force report. It's been a little while since you've done this kind of stuff, you know? You've been working at a desk for the last however many years. And yeah. And so Jim talked a minute ago about the commands. So the commands are specifically in that Mesa shooting, you can listen to those commands and you could say, like, there are parts of it that were good and parts that were bad, right? It's good to be very, very specific. It's good to be very, very clear. It's even good to be honest about how serious the consequences are, right? What's not good, though, is to fail to recognize that stress plays a role. And in the academy, we can teach recruits these commands about, what we're going to do when we're telling someone to, turn around, walk backwards, lift up your shirt, do the Macarena.
Pat your head, rub your tummy.
Right, at the same time, or we're going to shoot you. And I can get recruits to recite that stuff word for word in the academy, right? Like good little robots. But as soon as they go out into the field and there's a little bit of pressure, they're like a big jiggly pile of goo. And just like the commander said in this particular scenario, I just couldn't get the words out of my mouth. Yeah, I know. It's harder than it looks. And everyone thinks like, well, you're supposed to be trained for that. It's like, well, this is the gap, though, is I can sit you down in a classroom and I can have you recite stuff word for word, but it doesn't simulate self-preservation. Stress does weird things like that, right? It affects our attention and our focus. It makes our decision-making a lot less reliable in several ways. It can, for one thing, it can literally make sounds muffled or inaudible. Something like 70 to 80% of police officers report not being able to hear their gun fire after being involved in a shooting. It's a known phenomenon, and I've got, it would take me, I'd have to pull out a PowerPoint to get the links to all, there's like 5 or 6 studies, and they're all from different years, different sample sizes, and it's consistent across the board. 70 to 80% of police officers after a shooting report that they didn't even hear their gun going off because sounds get muffled, right? That's the part of our brain when self-preservation is at play. It just doesn't really care about that. And so it just blocks it out and focuses on other things. And like I said, this is all something that happens subconsciously as part of that little assessment of danger that our brains do. And it separates conscious and rational thought. Conscious and rational thought are hindered by self-preservation. And the way that I teach that is when the adrenaline hits, we lose 100 IQ points.
And I know someone out there is like, well, it's actually 67 IQ points.
Right.
If you're that guy, screw you.
Yeah.
I don't have the actual stats. I just know that I get a lot dumber when I'm stressed out.
It turns out that if Jim hits adrenaline and loses 100 IQ points, he might be in the negative. So
that's actually true.
So, but you get the point. It's not 100 IQ points, but the point is you lose IQ points when the adrenaline hits. those primitive ape brain behaviors are powerful things. And if we ever want to get ahead of those, it takes a substantial amount of training. It takes a lot of work, and that requires money, by the way, and staffing and resources. And frankly, most departments are just not equipped for that. But it's something that, from the outside looking in, it seems really easy. Why couldn't they give better commands? It's like, well, it's surprisingly harder than you think. And I don't, other than bringing you out to a simulator or a scenario where I'm going to shoot little paint rounds at you and say like, hey, I want you to clearly tell me exactly what you want me to do. You're not going to understand that until you try it.
And bringing this across the concealed carry, and there are a couple different concealed carry aspects here. There are lots of training programs out there for personal defense, and frankly, a lot of them are worthless. So how do you know when you found a good one? I think one of the key points is it should focus on helping you perform well under stress. And I'm not talking about those Russian YouTube videos where they shoot balloons out of each other's hands.
Oh my God.
Yeah, those are cool. Fun to watch. I don't want to play in them. And I'm talking about scenario-based training where you have to get stressed out and have someone kind of pressure you in a scenario. UTM or paint marking rounds, simunitions are good. Paintball, if it's facilitated right, could be good. Just anything where they're stressing you out, getting in your face. And to bring this whole discussion over concealed carry, consider what you're going to do if there's someone in your house, you confront them, they freeze, they put their hands up. Well, now what are you going to do? I know a lot of people are like, well, I'd shoot them anyway. Okay, that'll end well for you. But say you're in your underwear, you've got your gun, and the guy maybe understands English, maybe doesn't. He's basically compliant. So what are you going to tell him to do?
And if you've got to walk away to get onto your cell phone or something, what are you going to do with the guy? Because you might be walking away from him, right? There's a whole.
So think through that, train through that.
And what Jim's saying about the stress thing is kind of what we're getting at, is all the weird things that stress do to us. Because first of all, giving commands is seemingly difficult to teach. But that being said, it doesn't excuse cops from being good at it. Like, that's still what we do, right? It's still why you get the big bucks, my $24 an hour or whatever. We still have to be good at that. But I understand where you're coming from when I know that, hey, if you think that this guy might actually be dangerous, it's harder to get exactly the words out that you want to get. Not to mention there's other things like, can he even hear me in his car, which is however many feet away, and I got to yell, and there's a helicopter overhead and all these things, right?
And a language barrier and an alcohol
and he's
barrier.
Drunk or whatever. But you have to understand the effects of this stress, and the important ways of countering that is by being inoculated to that stress. Police officers need to spend more time doing this. And the other part of this, and Jim kind of alluded to it, but the bad guys got that stress too, right? That fight or flight behavior, fight, flight, or freeze. There's certain, and we talked about this in the OODA Loop episodes, but there's been several cases where we've addressed somebody and perhaps someone that's kind of dangerous or violent, we've addressed them in a more aggressive way, and they'll just freeze up on you. And it's important for us to understand that there's a difference potentially between someone who's not hearing me and not listening to me. Just because I'm giving him instructions and he's not compliant, it might not be because he's voluntarily telling me to screw off. It could be because his sympathetic nervous response is causing a situation that he's not hearing me.
Just spiked.
Yeah.
Yep.
So understand that bad guys have a sympathetic nervous system too. And so there's little things that we have to consider. Things like, if the guy's already worked up, as he was in the Mesa shooting, and I start screaming at him at the top of my lungs, well, his ability to think clearly isn't going to get any better. And so we have to monitor and adjust for that. Again, this whole stress thing is not an excuse for the cops. They've got to get better at it. And that means that we've got to compensate. We have to be the people that bring the calm to that chaos, right? And in the Mesa shooting, it's very, very clear how worked up the guy that got shot was. And I don't want to call him a suspect because I don't know if he did anything even wrong, but you have to understand how serious that could have been in this situation, right? It doesn't mean that I can't calm a guy down and say, listen, I think that you have a gun, and if you reach to your waistband, do you understand what that means for me and how big of a deal that's going to be for you? You can have a conversation with somebody. You just don't need to scream at them, right?
You can literally teach them a little empathy
Yes.
while you're handling them.
Yeah, like maybe even go, hey man, listen closely, okay? My name is Mike. What's your name? Jim. Okay, Jim. Whatever you do, you need to keep your hands where I can see them. Do you get it? Yeah, I got it. Okay. Understand how big of a deal this is, right? And just have a conversation. Am I in a rush at this point? I'm not in a rush. You can slow that down a little bit, right?
Absolutely.
So, like I said, there's a lot of rules and training and procedural stuff that's going to be different between cops and concealed carry people. I know Jim was kind of getting into that a little bit. But there's something to be said about going through this critical thinking process and trying to see the different factors. When we talk about that whole building snowmobiles thing, I think that going through police use of force incidents is particularly valuable to concealed carry holders or anyone that might have to defend themselves, out in public. It doesn't mean that they're exactly the same. It just means that if you go through that process, you kind of understand some of the factors at play a little bit, and you've started to kind of mentally rehearse some of that stuff. All right. So those were our big things. Like I said, the big general categories that I think we can break down our assessment of these types of things in is understanding the time factor at play, right? Reaction time, etc. Understand the difference between, or at least an acknowledgement for, the known and measurable facts, the unknowns, and also your interpretation of the incident, the intent, all of those things. And those interpretation, the critical part of that assessment is how much weight do we give that, right? If I make the assessment that I don't think that guy was a danger, I don't think that guy was trying to hurt the officer, at what point am I just rolling the dice? I have to be careful making that assessment. And I don't want to use luck as a tactic. So, yeah, we want to look through that lens of, okay, this guy is probably just suicidal, or, okay, this guy is probably just trying to, it's a behavioral quirk or whatever. But we don't want to give an inappropriate weight to those assumptions because we never know if we're going to be accurate. So that's why the objectivity is important. And then finally, we have to understand the human elements and how our ape brains are going to take over and start driving the ship, because those factors are the most difficult to counter because I can't simulate it very well in training. Okay, and we're going to talk about that probably in the next episode a little bit more, stress inoculation stuff. But if you do anything else, take yourself down this little path and try to see both sides of it, because the world is not binary. It's not just a yes or no, black or white, good shooting, bad shooting, justified, not justified, murder or good. It's just not that simple.
And there are lessons to take from both the good shoots and the bad ones. It can be a good shoot and still kind of be a train wreck in the background. And so analyzing every shoot and debriefing it is good. Remember, we're building that snowmobile, right? Not every lesson is going to apply perfectly to your unique situation, but case studies will help give you some depth and context as you develop your own decision-making process. You have neither the time nor the luck, and luck is not a tactic, to make every mistake that every cop or concealed carrier or soldier has made. So go try to learn all those mistakes. And you can study them enough and build your own little personal data file so it's harder for the bad guys to throw you a curveball.
Yeah, the depth thing I think is a big key.
Tactical insight.
Yeah, and we talked about this in the last episode, but earlier we talked about it too, where I described how, number one, cops don't get enough training. And it's not their fault. They just don't, they're under-resourced, and that's just the way it is. And so listening to stuff like this helps give you some of that depth, right? Where you're adding to kind of your repertoire and your insight. And it also, the second thing is it helps with being able to explain it. And like I said, a lot of cops, I think, implicitly understand these factors, but they don't understand them well enough to really explain it to someone who doesn't know any better. And
so when it comes out like, well, you're not a cop, so you couldn't understand. And how do you think that flies?
In exactly those words.
Yep.
And that's not doing anyone any favors. And so it's the same thing for non-cops. If you're going to judge a police shooting or perhaps engage a police officer in a discussion about one on the internet where everyone's right, it gives you kind of some fodder for good decision-making type, critical thinking lessons that you can actually have a productive conversation. Now we can all get better. And that's, again, the whole goal of this project, is to have more meaningful discussions. There's lessons in it for concealed carriers. There's certainly lessons in it for the military, as we're seeing with the way our modern conflicts have gone. But I want you to think about citizens and the public and those interactions with law enforcement. We need to do a better job of building that mutual understanding and trust. And the reality is, I think if you take out the vocal, minorities on either side of those debates, we have a lot of that. But we can do a little bit better in understanding each other, and that's for both sides. That's all I got, Jim.
I'm just going to try and understand everything better. It's good. That's all I got.
It's very holistic of you.
I know. I feel at peace with myself right now.
All right, so like always, if you haven't gone and liked us on Facebook, please do that, because we've got just under 1,000 likes on the page, and I really want to break that number. So go do that. Tell your friends.
And tell your friends.
Yeah, tell your friends.
Whoa, jinx.
Yeah, it's like we think alike. Share it with your friends. Get your friends on there. Invite people to the podcast if you like it, if you think it's worth your time or their time. And more importantly, give us feedback. info@tacticaltangents.com. Facebook, you could send us messages. We want to interact with you guys. If you have questions, if you have feedback, concerns, if you think we're full of crap, then tell us. We're kind of just flying blind here. So not in terms of doing our day jobs, but in terms of trying to convey this project in a meaningful way. So we need feedback on how we're doing with that. And like we always tell you, if you haven't subscribed already, make sure you do that so you can get new episodes. We put them out on the 1st and the 15th of every month. And that's all we got. Good talk.